There's a strange thing that happens as we grow older. Most people never talk about it. In fact, many people don't even notice it happening. One day, you wake up and realize that years have passed. Not a few years, decades. The children who once needed you have grown up. Friends you thought would always be there have disappeared from your life. Some moved away, some drifted apart, and some left this world entirely. Meanwhile, the face in the mirror keeps changing, little by little, year after year. And yet, somewhere inside, there is still a part of you that says, I'm the same person I've always been. But are you? Take a moment and really think about it. The person you were at 20, where are they now? The dreams you once had, the fears you once carried, the things that seemed so important. Most of them are gone. And still, something inside keeps whispering, this is me. This is who I am. For centuries, Zen masters have asked a simple question. Who exactly is this me we spend our whole lives protecting? Because if we look closely, much of our suffering seems to grow from that very place. The need to defend ourselves, the need to be right, the need to be respected, the need to be remembered, the need to feel important. Tonight, I want to share a few old stories. Not because they happened long ago, but because human beings haven't changed very much. The clothes are different, the technology is different, the world is different. But the human heart remains surprisingly familiar. The same fears, the same hopes, the same loneliness, the same search for peace. And perhaps, hidden inside these stories, there is something that has been waiting for you to notice all along. Not a new belief, not a new philosophy, just something simple, something you may have overlooked for years. And it begins with a man everyone believed was a thief. Many years ago, in a quiet corner of Japan, there stood a small temple surrounded by rolling hills and tall cedar trees. It wasn't famous because of its size. It wasn't known for wealth or beautiful buildings. People came because a Zen master named Bankei lived there. Word about him had spread far beyond the nearby villages. Some people traveled for days just to hear him speak. Others came carrying questions they had been unable to answer for years. Questions about suffering, questions about peace, questions about why life often felt so much heavier than it seemed it should. On a warm afternoon near the end of summer, the temple hall was especially crowded. Farmers sat shoulder to shoulder with merchants. Travelers rested beside monks. The wooden floor creaked softly whenever someone shifted their weight. Outside, the sound of cicadas drifted through the open windows. The air was still, the atmosphere peaceful. Bankei sat at the front of the hall. His posture was relaxed, his voice calm and steady. He wasn't speaking about complicated philosophy. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. In fact, some people found his teachings almost too simple. Again and again, he reminded people that what they were looking for was already within them. That peace wasn't something to be earned. That wisdom wasn't waiting at the end of a long journey. That the thing they were searching for had never truly been lost. The audience listened quietly. Some nodded in agreement. Others sat with their eyes closed, absorbing every word. Then suddenly, everything changed. A sharp cry cut through the silence. Several people turned at once. Near the back of the hall, an elderly woman was staring at a man seated beside her. Her face was pale. Her hand trembled as she pointed directly at him. "My money," she shouted. "He took my money." The room erupted instantly. The peaceful atmosphere disappeared as though it had never existed. People rose to their feet. Voices overlapped. Questions became accusations. Accusations became anger. Several men pushed through the crowd and grabbed the stranger before he could move. The old woman was nearly in tears. She insisted she had seen him reach into her bag. She insisted she had watched him take the small pouch of coins with her own eyes. Within moments, the pouch was found hidden beneath his robe. For most people in the room, the situation seemed obvious. The evidence was there. The man had been caught. The story was finished before it had even begun. A few people demanded that he be thrown out. Others said the temple should never allow him to return. One man suggested dragging him into the village as a warning to others. The stranger stood silently. His clothes were worn. His face looked tired. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He did not beg for mercy. Perhaps he knew there was no point. Perhaps he had stood in situations like this many times before. And perhaps what hurt most was not being called a thief. Perhaps what hurt most was knowing that everyone had already decided who he was, without knowing anything about him, without knowing where he came from, without knowing what had brought him to this moment. To the crowd, he was no longer a human being. He was simply a thief, a label, a judgment, a role. And once a crowd gives someone a role, it rarely wants to take it back. As the anger grew louder, many people turned toward Bankei. They expected him to settle the matter. After all, he was the teacher, the respected master, the man whose wisdom had brought them all together. Surely he would condemn the thief. Surely he would agree that punishment was necessary. Surely he would stand with the crowd. But Bankei did not speak. Not immediately. He simply sat there, watching, listening, looking first at the old woman, then at the angry faces surrounding the stranger, then at the stranger himself. A long silence filled the room, long enough to make people uncomfortable, long enough for the shouting to fade away, long enough for everyone to become aware once again of the cicadas singing outside. Finally, Bankei raised his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was so calm that it seemed almost out of place. "Release him." The men holding the stranger froze. Several people exchanged confused looks. The old woman stared in disbelief. No one moved. For a moment, it seemed as though the entire room had stopped breathing. Then Bankei said something even stranger, something that no one present expected to hear. "I did not see a thief standing here." The words hung in the air. No one understood. The pouch had been found. The man had been caught. Everyone had seen what happened. How could he not be a thief? The crowd waited, confused, curious, even a little unsettled. And perhaps, without realizing it, every person in that room was about to discover that the real lesson had nothing to do with the man standing before them. The real lesson was about themselves. And perhaps that is where this story becomes uncomfortable. Because it is easy to listen to a story about a thief. It is much harder to recognize ourselves in the crowd. Most of us would like to believe that if we had been sitting in that temple, we would have behaved differently. We would have been more compassionate, more understanding, less judgmental. But would we? Take a moment and think about the last time someone disappointed you. Maybe it was a family member. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was someone you trusted. How quickly did your mind begin creating a story about who they were? Not what they did, who they were. There's a difference, a very important difference. When someone lies to us, we often stop seeing a person who told a lie. Instead, we begin seeing a liar. When someone betrays us, we stop seeing a person who made a painful mistake. We begin seeing a betrayer. When someone hurts us, we stop seeing a human being struggling with their own fears and confusion. We begin seeing an enemy. And once that label appears, it becomes very difficult to see anything else. The mind loves certainty. It loves simple stories. It loves dividing the world into categories. Good people, bad people, people like us, people unlike us, people who deserve compassion, people who deserve punishment. At first, this feels harmless. It even feels useful. After all, judging others can give us a sense of safety. If that person is wrong, then perhaps I am right. If that person is foolish, then perhaps I am wise. If that person is broken, then perhaps I am whole. But beneath all of this, something else is happening. The ego is quietly strengthening itself. Because the ego survives through comparison. It needs someone beneath it, someone to look down on, someone to blame, someone to fear. Without that separation, the ego begins to lose its shape, and that can feel frightening. Think about how often this happens in everyday life. A neighbor says something we disagree with. A stranger posts an opinion online. A politician supports an idea we dislike. Almost immediately, the mind starts building walls. We stop being curious. We stop listening. We stop asking questions. Instead, we place the person into a box. And once they are inside that box, we no longer need to understand them. We only need to judge them. But here's the strange thing. The moment we place another person into a box, we place ourselves into one as well. Because every judgment creates two prisons. One for the person being judged, and one for the person doing the judging. The judged person becomes trapped inside a label. The judge becomes trapped inside an identity. I am the good one. I am the wise one. I'm the one who knows better. And that identity can become surprisingly heavy. Many people spend years carrying it, sometimes entire lifetimes, always trying to prove they are right, always trying to prove they are better, always trying to protect the image they have built of themselves. Perhaps this is why so many people feel exhausted, not because life is difficult, although life can certainly be difficult, but because defending an identity requires endless effort. The ego never rests. It is always comparing, always measuring, always evaluating, always asking the same question: where do I stand compared to everyone else? And the older we become, the more opportunities life gives us to see this. A child makes choices we don't understand. A spouse says something hurtful. A friend changes. A coworker disappoints us. Again and again, life presents us with moments where we can either see a human being or see a label, a thief, a failure, a selfish person, a difficult person, an irresponsible person, a bad person. The labels come easily. Seeing clearly is much harder. Bankei understood something that most people miss. He understood that every human being is larger than their worst moment, larger than their greatest mistake, larger than the story others tell about them. And perhaps the same is true for you. Think about your own life. Have there been moments you wish you could take back? Moments when fear made you act badly? Moments when anger spoke louder than wisdom? Moments when you hurt someone without meaning to? Most of us have such moments. Yet we hope others will see more than our mistakes. We hope they will see our intentions, our struggles, our humanity. So why is it so difficult to offer that same understanding to someone else? Perhaps because the ego fears what would happen if we did. If we stopped judging, if we stopped comparing, if we stopped dividing the world into us and them, then who would we become? Who would be left? That question can feel unsettling. Because for many people, judgment has become part of their identity. But Bankei was pointing towards something deeper. A freedom that appears when we no longer need to stand above anyone. A peace that appears when we no longer need to prove that we are better than someone else. A kindness that appears naturally when we realize that every person we meet is fighting battles we cannot see, including ourselves. And perhaps the most difficult person to stop judging is not the stranger. It is not the neighbor. It is not even the thief. Perhaps the most difficult person to stop judging is the person staring back at us from the mirror. And that brings us to another story. A story about a young boy who desperately wanted to be seen. Not far from where Bankei taught, another Zen master lived many years later. His name was Hakuin. Unlike Bankei, Hakuin was known throughout Japan. People spoke about him with admiration. Some feared him. Others traveled great distances simply to hear a few words from him. He was famous for seeing through excuses. for cutting through confusion, for exposing the ways the mind deceives itself. One morning, a woman arrived at the temple carrying a burden she could no longer handle alone. Beside her stood a young boy. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old. His clothes were clean. His face was bright. At first glance, he seemed like any other child. But his mother was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes not from lack of sleep, but from worry. The kind of exhaustion many parents know well. She bowed deeply before Hakuin. Then she began to speak. Her voice trembled as she explained that her son had been stealing. Not once, not twice, many times. Small things at first. Fruit from a neighbor's garden, coins from a drawer, a toy belonging to another child. Nothing of great value. Yet each incident left her feeling more frightened than the one before. She had scolded him, punished him, lectured him. She had tried kindness. She had tried anger. Nothing seemed to work. And now she had come hoping that the famous Zen master would do what she could not. Fix her son. As she spoke, the boy stared at the floor. His shoulders were tense. His hands clenched tightly together. He knew why he was there. He knew what adults thought of him. A troublemaker, a disappointment, a problem to be solved. When the mother finished speaking, silence settled over the room. Hakuin looked at the boy for a long moment. The child avoided his gaze. No doubt he expected what usually came next. Another lecture, another warning, another adult telling him everything that was wrong with him. Finally, Hakuin spoke. "Is it true?" he asked gently. The boy nodded. "Have you taken things that did not belong to you?" Again, the boy nodded. The room remained silent. The mother waited, certain that the rebuke was coming. Then Hakuin smiled, a small smile, almost playful. And what he said next shocked everyone. "You must be very talented." The boy looked up immediately. His mother blinked in confusion. For a moment, she wondered if she had heard correctly. Talented? What kind of response was that? Hakuin continued. "Do you know how difficult stealing can be?" The boy stared, unsure whether this was a trick. "You must be quick. You must pay attention. You must notice details other people miss. You must know exactly when nobody is looking." The boy listened carefully. No adult had ever spoken about him this way. Most only spoke about his failures, his mistakes, his bad behavior. But Hakuin was describing abilities, strengths, qualities. The child felt something begin to soften inside him. Not because he was proud, but because for the first time, someone seemed to be looking beyond the label. For years, everyone had been focused on what he had done. No one had asked who he was. No one had wondered what he was searching for. No one had noticed the loneliness hidden beneath the behavior. Hakuin leaned forward slightly. Then he lowered his voice. "Tell me something. When you take these things, what do you feel?" The boy hesitated. No one had ever asked him that question. Not once. Adults usually wanted explanations, excuses, confessions, but not feelings. The room remained quiet. Eventually the boy answered, "I don't know." Hakuin nodded. "Then let's look together." The boy swallowed nervously. The old master continued. "Do you feel excitement?" The child nodded slightly. "Do you feel powerful?" Another nod. "Do you feel noticed?" This time the boy looked up, only for a moment, but it was enough. Hakuin saw the answer, and perhaps the boy saw it too. The master smiled softly. "There it is." The child lowered his eyes again. Something inside him had been revealed, not to the room, not to his mother, but to himself, because the truth was never really about the objects. The fruit, the coins, the toys, those things were merely symbols. What the boy truly wanted was something much harder to describe. He wanted to feel important. He wanted to feel capable. He wanted to feel seen. And if we are honest, is that not something all of us want? Not only children, adults too, perhaps especially adults. How many choices do we make simply to feel valued? How many hours do we work? How many achievements do we chase? How many arguments do we enter? How many possessions do we collect? How often do we desperately hope someone will look at us and say, "You matter. I see you. You are enough." The room remained still. The boy sat quietly, listening, and for the first time in a long time, he did not feel like a problem. He felt understood. But Hakuin was not finished. The deepest lesson was still waiting to be revealed. For a while, no one spoke. The boy sat quietly. His mother sat quietly. Even the birds outside seemed to have fallen silent. Hakuin looked at the child with the kind of attention that is becoming increasingly rare in the world. He wasn't looking at the behavior. He wasn't looking at the problem. He was looking at the person. And perhaps that is why the boy could not look away. Because deep down, every human being longs for that experience. To be seen without being judged. To be understood without being condemned. To be accepted without having to pretend. Finally, Hakuin spoke again. "You know," he said, "when I was young, I once took a persimmon from a neighbor's tree." The boy's eyes widened. His mother looked surprised. A famous Zen master admitting such a thing? Hakuin chuckled softly. "Oh yes, I thought I was very clever. I waited until no one was looking. I chose the perfect moment. I climbed the tree. I took the fruit, and I escaped without being caught." The boy listened carefully. For the first time, he wasn't listening to a lesson. He was listening to a story about someone who felt human, someone who understood. Hakuin continued, "When I finally ate the persimmon, it tasted sweet, very sweet. But later that night, something strange happened. The room grew quiet again. The boy leaned forward slightly. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought about the owner of the tree. I imagined him searching for the missing fruit. I imagined his confusion, his disappointment, his frustration." The old master smiled sadly. And suddenly, the sweetness disappeared. The boy remained silent. Something about the story felt familiar. Not because he had stolen fruit, but because he knew exactly what Hakuin was describing. The excitement, the thrill, the feeling of getting away with something. And then, the emptiness afterward. The strange feeling that what we hoped would make us feel bigger somehow leaves us feeling smaller. Hakuin nodded slowly. "That was the day I learned something." The boy waited. So many people spend their lives taking things. Money, attention, recognition, status, approval. They believe those things will fill the emptiness they feel inside. The master paused, but the emptiness remains. The words settled heavily into the room, not only for the child, for the mother as well, for anyone who had ever chased something hoping it would finally make them feel complete. Hakuin turned toward the boy. "You are intelligent." The boy blinked. No one had called him that in a long time. "You are observant. You are brave. You are capable." The boy felt warmth rise into his chest, not because he was being praised, but because someone had finally recognized qualities that existed beneath the mistakes. Then Hakuin leaned forward, and his voice became softer. "The same mind that can take something can also protect something. The same courage used for stealing can be used for honesty. The same cleverness used to deceive can be used to help." The boy listened carefully. Every word seemed to land somewhere deeper than the words spoken by other adults. Because Hakuin was not trying to shame him. He was showing him another possibility, a different direction, a different way to use the gifts he already possessed. And perhaps that is what true teaching is. Not forcing someone to become someone else, but helping them discover what they already are. The old master smiled. "You do not need to become a different person. You only need to aim your strengths in a different direction." The boy lowered his head, not out of shame, but because something inside him was beginning to change. For the first time, he could see himself as more than his mistakes, more than the label others had given him, more than the story he had begun telling himself. And that may have been the most important moment of all, because change rarely begins when we hate ourselves. It begins when we finally see ourselves clearly, with honesty, with compassion, without pretending. The mother quietly wiped tears from her eyes, not because her son had been punished, but because he had been understood. And sometimes understanding reaches places that punishment never can. As the morning sunlight streamed through the temple windows, Hakuin sat silently for a few moments. Then he asked one final question, a question not only for the boy, but for every person who would hear this story in the centuries to come. What is it you're really trying to steal? The room became still, because suddenly the question was no longer about fruit, or coins, or toys. It was about something much deeper, something hidden in nearly every human heart. The longing to feel important, the longing to feel worthy, the longing to feel seen. And that is where the ego often hides most successfully. Not in pride, not in power, but in the quiet hunger to be noticed, to be admired, to be told that we matter. A hunger that follows many people their entire lives, even long after childhood has ended. Perhaps that question is worth sitting with for a moment. What is it you're really trying to steal? At first, the answer seems obvious. Most people would say they're not stealing anything. They work for what they have. They earn their living. They follow the rules. And yet, if we look a little deeper, we may discover something surprising. Many of us spend our lives trying to steal attention, trying to steal approval, trying to steal admiration, trying to steal the feeling of being important. Not because we are bad people, not because we are selfish, but because somewhere deep inside, there's a part of us that fears being unseen, a part that wonders, do I matter? Am I enough? Would anyone notice if I disappeared? These are not new questions. Human beings have been carrying them for thousands of years. The little boy in Hakuin's story carried them. And if we are honest, perhaps we carry them too. Think back to your younger years. Maybe you worked hard to build a career. Maybe you sacrificed sleep, sacrificed weekends, sacrificed time with family, not only for money, but for something harder to admit. Recognition, respect, the feeling that your life meant something. There is nothing wrong with that. Every human being wants to feel valued. The problem begins when our sense of worth depends entirely on how others see us. Because then we become prisoners. Prisoners of praise. Prisoners of approval, prisoners of other people's opinions. And the strange thing is that no amount of approval ever seems to be enough. Someone compliments us. For a moment, we feel good, and the feeling fades. Someone admires us. For a moment, we feel important, and the feeling fades. Someone recognizes our achievements. For a moment, we feel complete, then the feeling fades. And so we begin chasing the next compliment, the next achievement, the next success, the next sign that we matter. The ego is very clever this way. It keeps moving the finish line. It whispers, just one more accomplishment, just one more victory, just one more person who appreciates you. Then you'll finally feel whole. But somehow, that day never arrives. Perhaps you have noticed this in your own life. Perhaps there was a goal you spent years pursuing, something you believed would finally bring peace. A promotion, a larger home, more money, more recognition, more success. And then one day, you achieved it, only to discover that the peace you expected lasted a few days, a few weeks, maybe a few months. Then the mind began searching again, looking for the next thing, the next proof that you were enough, the next reason to feel valuable. This is what Hakuin saw in a young boy. The objects were never the real issue. The real issue was the feeling underneath, the longing underneath, the belief that something outside himself could give him the worth he could not yet find within. And perhaps this becomes even more visible as we grow older. When we are young, life gives us many roles. A career, a title, responsibilities. people depending on us. But eventually, life changes. Children grow up. Retirement arrives. The phone rings less often. The world becomes quieter. And suddenly many people find themselves facing a question they have avoided for decades. Who am I when no one needs me? Who am I when I am no longer achieving? Who am I when there is no audience? For some people, this question feels frightening because much of their identity was built around being seen, being needed, being admired. Without those things, they feel invisible. And yet, perhaps invisibility is not the problem. Perhaps the problem is that we have spent so long looking for our value in the eyes of others that we have forgotten where it truly comes from. A flower does not need applause to bloom. A mountain does not need recognition to stand tall. The moon does not ask for permission to shine. And yet somehow human beings convince themselves that they must constantly earn the right to exist. They must constantly prove their worth, prove their importance, prove that they matter. One exhausting way to live. Imagine carrying that burden for 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, always trying to become enough, always trying to convince yourself that you deserve your place in the world. No wonder so many people feel tired. No wonder so many people feel restless. No wonder peace feels so difficult to find. Because peace cannot grow where there is constant striving. Peace appears when the striving begins to soften. When we stop asking, how do others see me? And begin asking, what remains when I stop performing? That is the question hidden inside Hakuin's story. Not whether the boy stole, not whether he deserved punishment, but whether he could learn to see his own value without taking it from somewhere else. And perhaps the same question is being asked of us, right here, right now, as you listen to these words. If no one praised you tomorrow, would you still be enough? If no one admired you, would you still be enough? If every title disappeared, every achievement faded, every role was taken away, what would remain? Sit with that question for a moment. Do not rush to answer it. Simply notice what happens inside. Because somewhere beneath the need to be seen, beneath the need to be admired, beneath the need to matter, there is something quieter, something older, something that has been present your entire life. And the next story begins with a monk who spent years searching for that very thing. There is a trap that many people never see. And strangely enough, it often appears when we're trying to become better people. Most of us understand how the ego hides in success. We understand how it hides in money, in status, in reputation. But there's another place where it hides far more cleverly. It hides inside our efforts to improve ourselves. It hides inside the desire to become wiser, kinda, more spiritual, more enlightened. And because those goals sound noble, we rarely question them. Many centuries ago, a young monk arrived at a monastery led by the great Zen master Dogen. The young man was sincere. No one doubted that. He woke before everyone else. He worked harder than everyone else. He meditated longer than everyone else. If there was cleaning to be done, he volunteered. If there was chanting to be done, he arrived first. The other monks admired him. Some even envied him. From the outside, he looked like the perfect student, the kind of student every teacher hopes for. Yet there was something restless about him, a tension he could never quite release, a feeling that no matter how much he practiced, it was never enough. No matter how many hours he spent meditating, he always felt he should meditate more. No matter how disciplined he became, he always felt he should be more disciplined. No matter how much progress he made, he always fell behind, as if he were running toward a destination that kept moving farther away. One autumn evening, after the monastery had fallen silent, the young monk remained in the meditation hall. The other monks had gone to sleep. The candles burned low. The wind moved softly through the trees outside. Yet he continued sitting, hour after hour, determined, focused, pushing himself harder. He told himself it was dedication. He told himself it was commitment. He told himself it was practice. But deep down, another voice whispered something else. Not enough. You are not there yet. You must try harder. The monk listened to that voice, the way many of us do, without realizing it, without questioning it, without noticing how much power it had over him. Near midnight, footsteps echoed softly through the hall. The young monk opened his eyes. Standing nearby was Dogen, the founder of the monastery. The teacher everyone respected. The old master said nothing at first. He simply sat down beside him. The two remained silent, listening to the wind, listening to the stillness, listening to the night. Several minutes passed. Then Dogen asked a simple question. Why are you still here? The monk straightened his posture. I want to improve myself. Dogen nodded. The monk continued. I don't want to waste time. I want to become a better practitioner. I want to awaken. The old master listened patiently. Then he asked another question. And what happens if you fail? The monk hesitated. The question caught him off guard. I don't know. Dogen smiled. Yes, you do. The young man lowered his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, the monk admitted the truth. I am afraid. Dogen nodded again. Afraid. Such a simple word. Yet behind it stood years of effort, years of striving, years of pushing himself. The old master looked toward the candlelight. Then he spoke quietly. Most people believe they are searching for peace, but often they are running from fear. The monk listened carefully. Dogen continued. You believe you're practicing because you love the truth. But part of you is practicing because you fear being inadequate. The words landed heavily. Because they were true, painfully true, the young monk suddenly saw something he had never noticed before. Every meditation session, every extra hour, every act of discipline had been carrying an invisible burden. The fear of not being enough, the fear of failure, the fear of never becoming the person he wanted to be. And for the first time, he wondered whether that fear had been guiding his entire journey. Dogen picked up a small stone lying nearby. He held it in his hand. Then he asked, how does this stone become a stone? The monk looked confused. It already is a stone. Dogen smiled. Exactly. The master placed the stone back on the floor. It does not struggle to become itself. It does not compare itself to other stones. It does not spend its days wondering whether it is enlightened enough. The monk couldn't help but laugh softly. The image seemed absurd, yet something about it touched him deeply, because he suddenly realized how much of his life had been spent trying to become someone else. Someone wiser, someone purer, someone more spiritual, someone more worthy. Always someone else, never simply himself. The candle flickered. The hall remained silent. And Dogen spoke once more, perhaps the most important words the young monk would ever hear. You are sitting here trying to become what you already are. The monk felt a chill move through his body, not because the night was cold, but because something inside him had begun to crack. The same way a shell cracks before new life emerges. The same way an illusion cracks before truth becomes visible. For years, he had imagined enlightenment as a destination. Something far away. Something waiting in the future. Something to be earned through endless effort. And now, sitting beside Dogen in the quiet darkness, he began to wonder. What if the very effort itself was the obstacle? What if all this striving was keeping him from seeing what had been here all along? The question lingered in the silence. And with it came a strange feeling. Not certainty, not understanding, but relief, as though he had been carrying a heavy load for many years, and for the first time had set it down. Yet the deepest lesson was still waiting, because Dogen was about to reveal one of the most subtle disguises the ego ever wears, the disguise of spiritual progress. Perhaps this sounds familiar, not because you are a monk, not because you spend hours meditating, but because the same pattern appears in almost every area of life. We tell ourselves, when I finally reach that goal, I'll be at peace. When I finally solve that problem, I'll be happy. When I finally become the person I should be, everything will be okay. And so we spend years chasing a future version of ourselves, a version that always seems just out of reach. The irony is almost heartbreaking. The mind promises peace, then immediately places peace somewhere else, somewhere ahead, somewhere distant, somewhere not yet. Have you ever noticed that? How often happiness is scheduled for later. Later when the bills are paid. Later when the children are settled. Later when the career is secure. Later when the body is healthier. Later when life becomes easier. Yet somehow later never arrives. Or if it does arrive, it stays only briefly before the mind creates a new destination, a new condition, a new requirement, a new reason why peace must wait. This is one of the ego's favorite tricks. It survives by keeping us in pursuit. Because if we ever stopped chasing, if we ever became fully present, if we ever accepted this moment completely, the ego would lose much of its power. Think about how often we measure ourselves. Even now, especially now, we compare our lives to other people's lives. We compare our achievements, our relationships, our finances, our appearance, our health. Sometimes we even compare our suffering. Who has struggled more? Who deserves sympathy? Who has had the harder life? The measuring never ends. And the strange thing is that the ego does not care whether the comparison makes us feel superior or inferior. Either way, it survives. If we feel superior, it says, "Look how far you've come." If we feel inferior, it says, "Look how far you still have to go." Different stories. Same prison. Dogen understood this. That is why he looked beyond the monk's effort. He looked beyond the discipline, beyond the long hours of meditation. He looked directly at the fear underneath. The fear that whispered, "You are not enough." Because once that fear is believed, life becomes an endless project of self-improvement. Now, there is nothing wrong with growth. There is nothing wrong with learning. There is nothing wrong with becoming wiser. The problem begins when growth is driven by self-rejection. When improvement becomes a way of escaping ourselves. When every goal secretly carries the message, "I will be worthy once I arrive." Many people live this way for decades. They achieve one thing after another. Yet the feeling of enoughness never comes. Not because they have failed, but because they have been searching in the wrong place. Imagine standing beside the ocean with a bucket. Each time a wave arrives, you fill the bucket. For a moment, it feels full. Then the water slowly leaks away. So you fill it again, and again, and again. That is how many people chase validation, achievement, recognition, even spiritual progress. The bucket never stays full. Not because there is something wrong with the ocean, but because the bucket was never designed to hold what we are asking it to hold. The young monk slowly began to understand this. He realized that for years he had been treating enlightenment as another achievement, another prize, another identity, something he could add to himself, something that would finally make him complete. But Dogen was pointing in the opposite direction, not toward becoming more, toward caring less, not toward acquiring something new, toward letting go of what was never necessary. And perhaps this is one of the hardest lessons for human beings to accept, because we are taught from an early age that more is better. More success, more knowledge, more possessions, more accomplishments, more recognition, more certainty. Yet some of the wisest people who have ever lived discovered something surprising. Peace rarely comes from adding. It often comes from subtracting. Subtracting the constant comparison. Subtracting the endless striving. Subtracting the stories we tell ourselves about who we should be. Until eventually we are left with something very simple. Just this moment. Just this breath. Just this life as it is. Not perfect. Not complete. Not finished. Yet somehow enough. For many people, this realization feels almost disappointing at first. The ego wants something dramatic. A secret. A breakthrough. A grand transformation. Instead, it discovers something ordinary. Something that has been quietly waiting in plain sight. The sound of the wind. The warmth of sunlight. The rhythm of breathing. The presence of being alive. Nothing extraordinary. And yet perhaps that is exactly why it is so easy to overlook. The young monk sat with Dogen until the first light of dawn began to enter the hall. Neither of them spoke very much. There was nothing left to explain. Some truths are not understood through words. They are understood through silence, through stillness, through direct experience. And as the darkness slowly gave way to morning, the monk noticed something unusual. For the first time in many years, he did not feel behind. He did not feel inadequate. He did not feel as though he needed to become someone else. He simply sat, breathing, listening, being, and perhaps that was the closest he had ever come to the peace he had spent years searching for. Not because he had finally arrived somewhere, but because, for a brief moment, he had stopped trying to arrive. And that brings us to the final story. A story about a man who carried a skull wherever he went. A story that reveals the last and perhaps greatest illusion of all. The illusion that there is a self to protect. There's an old story about the Zen master Ikkyu. Whether every detail is historically true is not important. Like many Zen stories, its value lies somewhere deeper than facts. It points towards something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. As Ikkyu grew older, people began noticing a strange habit. Wherever he traveled, he often carried a human skull. Sometimes it hung from his walking staff. Sometimes he placed it beside him while teaching. Sometimes he simply sat looking at it in silence. People were disturbed by this. Some thought it was morbid. Others thought it was inappropriate. A few wondered whether the old master had become eccentric with age. One day, a young student finally gathered enough courage to ask, "Master, why do you always carry that skull?" The others nearby leaned closer. They had wondered the same thing. Ikkyu smiled. Then he lifted the skull into the sunlight. For a few moments, he simply looked at it, as though greeting an old friend. Finally, he spoke. "Because it tells the truth." The student looked confused. "The truth about what?" Ikkyu's smile widened. "The truth about all of us." The young man remained silent. Waiting, the old master ran his fingers across the smooth surface of the skull. Then he asked, "Who was this person?" No one knew. A farmer? A merchant? A soldier? A king? A beggar? No one could say. All evidence had disappeared. The titles were gone. The possessions were gone. The achievements were gone. The failures were gone. Even the name had vanished. Everything the world once used to identify that person had disappeared. Only the skull remained. Ikkyu nodded softly. Once this person worried. Once this person dreamed. Once this person fell in love. Once this person feared losing everything. And now, the old master turned the skull slowly in his hands. Where are those worries? Where are those ambitions? Where are those victories? Where are those regrets? The students sat quietly, because they already knew the answer. Gone. Every one of them. The wind moved gently through the trees. Leaves rustled overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet something about the moment felt different. The skull had transformed from an object into a mirror. A mirror reflecting something few people want to face. Impermanence. Not as an idea, not as a philosophy, but as reality. Ikkyu looked at the young student. "Tell me, when you were 10 years old, who were you?" The student frowned. The question seemed strange. A child, Ikkyu nodded, and at 15, a different child, and at 20, the student smiled, different again. The master nodded once more. And now, the young man hesitated, because suddenly the answer seemed less obvious. Which version was the real one? The child? The teenager? The young adult? The person sitting here now? They had all disappeared, yet somehow he still felt like the same person. Ikkyu watched the confusion on his face. Then he asked the question at the heart of the story. If every version of you has come and gone, then who exactly are you protecting? The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread outward, slowly, silently, deep inside the student's mind, and perhaps inside ours as well. Because so much of life is spent protecting an image, an identity, a story. We defend our opinions. We defend our reputation. We defend our status. We defend our achievements. We defend our failures. Sometimes we even defend our suffering. Anything that helps reinforce the feeling of me, my life, my success, my pain, my story. Yet if we look closely, every one of those things changes. Constantly. The body changes. The mind changes. Relationships change. Beliefs change. Circumstances change. The world changes. Everything changes. And still we cling. Still we resist. Still we fight. As though holding tighter could somehow stop the river from flowing. Ikkyu gently placed the skull on the ground. Then he said something the student would never forget. Death is not the tragedy. The young man looked up, surprised. The master continued. The tragedy is spending your whole life afraid to live because you were too busy protecting an illusion. Silence followed, a deep silence, the kind that appears when words touch something true. For most people, the ego promises safety. It says, protect yourself, protect your image, protect your importance, protect your place in the world. But the more we protect these things, the more fearful we become. Because deep down we know they cannot last. Nothing lasts. Not youth, not wealth, not beauty, not status, not praise, not criticism, not success, not failure. All of it passes, just as every season passes, just as every wave returns to the sea, just as every breath eventually leaves the body. And strangely enough, this realization is not depressing. It is freeing, because if everything changes, then perhaps we no longer need to cling so tightly. If everything is temporary, then perhaps we can finally relax. Perhaps we can stop trying so hard to become someone. Perhaps we can stop carrying the exhausting burden of proving our worth. Perhaps we can simply be, for a moment, just this moment, just this breath, just this life, exactly as it is. The stories we explore tonight may seem different on the surface. A thief, a child, a monk, a skull, yet all of them point toward the same truth. The suffering was never created by life itself. It was created by the illusion of a separate self struggling to defend itself against reality. Bankei saw in judgment. Hakuin saw it in the hunger to be seen. Dogen saw it in endless striving. Ikkyu saw it in our fear of impermanence. Different stories, the same lesson, and perhaps that lesson can be expressed in a single question. Who would you be if there were no image left to defend? No role to perform, no reputation to protect, no audience to impress, no comparison to win. Just awareness, just presence, just life unfolding moment by moment. Perhaps that is what the Zen masters were pointing toward all along. Not becoming something new, but returning to what has always been here. Before the labels, before the fears, before the endless effort of trying to be someone. As you sit here now, listening to these final words, notice your breathing. Notice the stillness around you. Notice the simple fact that you are here, alive, present, aware, nothing to achieve, nothing to prove, nothing missing. And perhaps, just for tonight, you can set the burden down. You can let the stories go. You can let the questions remain. And you can rest, not as the person you think you are, but as the quiet awareness that has been here all along. Before we leave these stories behind tonight, take a slow breath. There is nowhere to go, nothing to solve, nothing to achieve. For the next few moments, simply listen. The thief is gone. The young boy is gone. The monk is gone. Even the skull has been set down. Only the lessons remain. And perhaps the most important lesson is this. Much of our suffering comes from carrying something we were never meant to carry. An image, an identity, a story about who we think we should be. Think about how much energy it takes to protect that story. The need to appear successful, the need to appear strong, the need to appear wise, the need to appear in control. Year after year, decade after decade, many people become exhausted without ever understanding why. Not because life is too heavy, but because the self they are carrying is too heavy. For a moment, imagine setting it down. Imagine letting go of every title you have ever held, every achievement, every failure, every compliment, every criticism. Imagine placing them beside you, just for tonight. You do not have to destroy them. You do not have to reject them. Simply set them down and notice what remains. Perhaps there is still breathing, still awareness, still presence, still life. The sky does not need a name to hold the clouds. The ocean does not need a title to hold the waves. And perhaps you do not need every story about yourself in order to be whole. Notice how the body feels. Notice the gentle rhythm of your breath. Notice the silence between thoughts. For a few moments, stop trying to become someone. Stop trying to improve yourself. Stop trying to fix yourself. Just be here, exactly as you are. This moment asks nothing from you. It does not ask you to be wiser. It does not ask you to be younger. It does not ask you to be more successful. It simply asks you to be present. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that has always been enough. The Zen masters spent their lives pointing towards something very simple. Not a secret, not a special power, not a hidden truth reserved for a select few. Something available to everyone. The peace that appears when we stop arguing with reality. The peace that appears when we stop demanding that life be different. The peace that appears when we stop protecting an illusion. As the night grows quieter, allow yourself to relax a little more. Allow your thoughts to come and go like clouds drifting across the sky. There's no need to follow them, no need to fight them, no need to believe every story they tell. Simply watch, simply notice, simply rest. And if one insight from tonight's stories remains with you tomorrow, let it be this. You do not need to become someone else in order to find peace. You do not need to earn your worth. You do not need to prove your value. You do not need to carry the entire weight of an identity. Life is already happening. This breath is already here. This moment is already complete. And perhaps beneath all the noise, beneath all the striving, beneath all the stories, you may discover what the Zen masters were pointing to all along. A quiet awareness, still, open, unburdened, waiting patiently beneath every experience, as it has always been, as it is now, and as it will remain long after tonight's stories have faded into silence.